A mere pause or lull? Or for the first time in more than a year, can the Middle East point to genuine de-escalation? We'll ask about the timing of guns going mostly silent in Lebanon after both Israel and Hezbollah agreed to a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. A ceasefire, not a peace treaty. Still, with Egypt now renewing moves to follow up with a truce in Gaza, we'll take stock of a region that's still holding its breath. At the center of it all, the ultimate political survivor, Benjamin Netanyahu. But does Israel's longest-serving prime minister still need a forever war to stave off inquiries into the failures of October 7th and his own corruption trial, where he has just gotten another delay? It's about more than one man's fortunes, of course. How much has the Middle East changed in the past 14 months? How much has it changed in the 10 weeks of the heaviest fighting that Lebanon has seen since 2006? What's left of the Iran-led so-called axis of resistance? And what, if anything, will an incoming Trump administration change to it all? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. Joining us from Beirut, journalist and author Rania Abu-Zaid. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
From London, she's been an international negotiator at times. Nomi Bar Yaakov, Associate Fellow at the think tank Chatham House. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Francois.
From Washington, Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, Resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me again.
And good to see Gil Mehaley, Editor-in-Chief of Causeur magazine. How are things?
Great, thank you.
Reminder, you can always listen to the listen to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. They've been rushing home by the thousands, like to the Hezbollah stronghold of Baalbek, a World Heritage Site that's now home that's also home to Roman-era ruins. They've been rushing home, even though they've been warned to wait in Lebanon. The truce remains brittle. There was the Israeli Air Force striking what it claims is a Hezbollah rocket storage facility in the southern coast city of Bessarieh this Thursday. Emerald Maxwell has more.
A day after the truce came into effect, it's already looking shaky. The Lebanese army accused Israel of violating the ceasefire several times on Wednesday and Thursday. This after Israeli warplanes fired on a Hezbollah weapons facility in southern Lebanon, hours after its tanks fired on people trying to return to certain areas, which it called a violation of the ceasefire. Under the agreement, Israeli forces have 60 days to return to their side of the Blue Line, and Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River, leaving a buffer zone to be patrolled by Lebanese troops and UN peacekeepers. The Israeli military has advised Lebanese not to return to their homes near the border yet, and also announced a nighttime curfew in South Lebanon from 5 p.m. Thursday till 7 a.m. the following day. Nonetheless, tens of thousands of Lebanese who fled their homes continue to head back to their towns and villages across the south, only to find scenes of devastation.
It's really tough. We never imagined it would be like this. We saw the pictures, but when we came and saw it in person, it was really difficult. We got here last night and the smoke was so thick, we couldn't take it.
It's heartbreaking, honestly. It breaks your heart because we don't deserve this. Lebanon doesn't deserve this.
Despite the ceasefire breaches, the clear-up has already begun in parts of the south. The country faces a long road to recovery. The cost of damage to housing is estimated at $2.8 billion, with more than 99,000 housing units destroyed, according to a World Bank report.
Rania Abu-Zaid, our correspondent in Beirut, earlier, despite the ceasefire violations, despite that airstrike, still talking about cautious optimism. Is that a sentiment shared?
Well, as we saw from that report, it is a very fragile, very shaky ceasefire. A ceasefire can't mean that one side, the Lebanese side, ceases fire while the other continues to act like an occupier, frankly, along the border belt in the south. It has imposed a curfew on residents in their own towns and villages, and it has warned other people not to return to check on their homes or what remains of it. So it is, the Lebanese are taking it one day, several hours at a time, because this is by no means a solid, cemented ceasefire.
It's very brittle, yet let me bring you in on this. Nomi Bar Yaakov, what is your feeling as to over what's going to happen in the next few days as Israeli soldiers move back? Is this ceasefire going to hold?
Well, I don't think they're going to move back within days. They've got 60 days to move back, and we're not talking about a very long distance. It's between the Litani and the border with Israel. It's about 30 kilometers. I think that, as the first speaker said, it is shaky. The main problem is that there isn't really an implementation mechanism that works. And we are likely to see exchanges between the Israeli army and any alleged violations that they are saying that they're encountering. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is stating at every possible opportunity today that his army, the Israeli army, is taking action against violations that they are seeing with Hezbollah. It is noteworthy that the Israeli army had requested the over 1 million displaced Lebanese not to return yet. And that, of course, given that they are returning, is going to cause difficulties and potential problems. On the other hand, in Israel, the government had stated very clearly that the over 100,000 residents of the north that are displaced should not return yet. And I think that sends a loud and clear message. The fact that the Prime Minister is asking residents not to return yet means that he is foreseeing potentially fighting again. And by fighting, I mean more serious fighting.
Listening the other night, Gil Miheli, to the Israeli Prime Minister, did you have the sense that this is a man who wants a ceasefire?
Yes, absolutely. The problem is that there was a ceasefire until the morning of October 8th. There was a ceasefire since August of 2006, and the mechanism for implementing and enforcing the conditions of the ceasefire were breached. Basically, Hezbollah bullied everyone. UNIFIL, the Lebanese army, which is as real as the Lebanese state. There are lots of people who work for Hezbollah in the Lebanese army, and the chief of staff said that confronting Hezbollah, which is their job, means civil war, and they will they will do anything to avoid civil war. So it's clear that the Lebanese army will not be of much help. So this is a very special situation where one of the parties, Israel, is supposed to be also the judge and the executioner, because there's no real third party capable of...
What about the UN peacekeepers?
Well, they've been there since '78. So if they were looking for a job with this kind of CV, they will die of hunger.
Rania Abu Zaid, you were last week for the New Yorker magazine in the Bekaa Valley. There's little or no wavering on the support for Hezbollah. Although there were people there was one man you quoted as told you, what do we have to do with Gaza, and showing frustration with Hezbollah. Your thoughts on Rania on right now, how brittle it is, the implementation of this ceasefire agreement?
Before I address that, the idea that Baalbek is a multi-sectarian area. Certainly, it has a significant Shiite population from which Hezbollah draws most, but not all, of its support. But it also has cross-sectarian support. There are Christians in Baalbek as well. There are Sunnis. There are other sects, and you can't confine or define a Lebanese person's political affiliations based on their sectarian identity. It tends to transcend it. It's not quite that neat. So certainly there is, Hezbollah has its domestic detractors, and they are from across the sectarian spectrum. It also has its supporters who are also similarly from across the sectarian spectrum. And the question of the Lebanese army, as your guest said, taking on, in quotes, Hezbollah or attempting to disarm it is it's an internal Lebanese question, something that the Lebanese themselves are going to discuss in terms of, in the context of a national defense strategy. These are all things on the agenda that Lebanon needs to address.
But it's been 2 years without a president. We did hear a bit of good news on that front, Rania, with the Speaker of Parliament announcing that on the 9th of January they would be convening to try to fill that gap. Is that a sign that, well, these rival factions can come together and govern the country and manage things?
Well, they have to, and they're all saying that they want to. The question is whether or not they will. But now is when the horse trading begins, and all of those discussions, the backroom discussions, will restart after they were paused during this very ferocious war.
Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, what was your initial reaction when you heard there was this ceasefire?
Well, I certainly had mixed emotions. On the one hand, I feel for the Lebanese people who have had to pay a heavy price for the adventurism and the recklessness of Hezbollah that had no business whatsoever in starting this war in the first place. Hezbollah, which refused to end this war a few months ago, while it still had its leadership intact, while it still had a little damage to the Lebanese people's housing and commercial infrastructure. This did not have to happen. This was an entirely futile, useless, ineffective, and unstrategic operation that did not need to happen. On the other hand, it also gave me a slight window of hope in that this may indirectly, or this may even directly, give Hamas some incentive to understand that it is, in fact, on its own, that neither Hezbollah nor Iran nor the Houthis are going to be able to extricate it from the disaster that it unleashed upon itself, upon its people in Gaza. There were some interesting components to the ceasefire that I thought may provide for a role model for what could follow in Gaza, which is that there's going to be a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from southern Lebanon. And that is something that Hamas has insisted be the case in Gaza, is that Hamas has insisted on a full and a complete withdrawal before agreeing to any ceasefire. And if Hezbollah was able to demonstrate that you can have a ceasefire that entails gradual withdrawal, then maybe Hamas will take cue from that and finally accept some sort of a negotiated settlement to the disaster that is unfolding in Gaza. On the other hand, I was also intrigued by the idea of the Lebanese armed forces, despite their weaknesses, despite their impotence and penetration by Hezbollah, as being the ultimate vanguard, if you will, of Lebanese sovereignty and looking at how do we being the international community, the United States, and certainly France, how do we give them the resources? How do we bolster their ability to fill that void as the Israelis withdraw, as Hezbollah backs up or backs off? So that could be replicated when it comes to the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. And so in terms of the details, I think there could be some elements, despite the differences between Lebanon and Gaza, that could prove valuable in crafting a new ceasefire in the Gaza Strip.
Nomi Baryakov, you agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I agree with everything that Mohammed Fouad Al-Khatib has just said. I think there's some elements that are encouraging. I think Hezbollah did not have to support Hamas. They chose to. They chose to get into this war on the 8th of October last year, and they paid and the Lebanese people paid a very heavy price for it. And Hamas also chose to attack Israel in a savage way on the 7th of October 2023. And the Palestinian people, both in Gaza and the West Bank, have paid a very, very heavy price for it. And it's time to end the war. And I think Hamas is feeling more isolated and is showing signs of being more flexible. And I think that, it's a bit difficult at the moment to know exactly who speaks for Hamas, given that both Ismail Haniyeh, who was the head of the political arm, and Yahya Sinwar and many of the military leaders in Hamas in Gaza have been killed. But it does look like Hamas will agree to a gradual withdrawal. I think that they know that Israel will not withdraw from the Gaza Strip in one go. And the fact that Hezbollah is also sponsored by Iran in the same way that Hamas is sponsored by Iran, has agreed to this, clearly with Iran's consent, puts pressure on Hamas to now agree to a ceasefire. And of course, the big question is how many and when will the hostages be released? And that is also going to be a gradual release. So it will be in Israel's interest to ensure that the ceasefire is kept so that hostages come back. There are 101 hostages, included dead and alive, and Israel would like the dead and alive ones to all get back. And the pressure is mounting. Today we have an Egyptian delegation in Israel working on the precise terms of the ceasefire and the gradual withdrawal. We can get into more details throughout this program. But I just think it is extremely significant that Egypt has put forward a proposal with some elements, like Mohammed Fuad al-Khatib said, drawing on what is going on in Lebanon.
All right, let's talk about the Gaza Strip in a moment. First, though, let's listen to one reaction which matters. Hezbollah has called the ceasefire a victory, positive spin, you might say. Israel's prime minister also.
A year later, it is not the same Hezbollah. We have set it back decades. We eliminated the axis of evil. We eliminated its top leaders, destroyed most of its rockets and missiles. We killed thousands of terrorists, and we demolished their underground tunnels. Infrastructure near our border they had been building for years.
Gil Mihaly, is there an element of hubris in what we just heard there from Benjamin Netanyahu, or is he correct?
Maybe from both sides. We have a very strange win-win situation. Well, anyway, before Nasrallah was killed, he said that he will not stop before there is a ceasefire in Gaza, which means until Hamas is...
And now Hezbollah has given up on that.
They've given up. There's no linkage between the two. And he also said that he will not withdraw his forces north of the Litani, and they engaged to do it. I don't know if they will, but they engaged to do it. And he also received a kind of an arrangement which is 1701, I mean the United Nations Security
Council. The resolution from 2006.
But 2.0, I mean, much enforced. I think that one of the reasons why Iran accepted, because they know that they are not going to respect it. They will try as soon as the ceasefire was declared. I'm sure they sent people south to check Israeli limits and where they can pass, and they will provoke. They will provoke, and they will try to find where they can roll back everything they gave in the negotiation. This was always the strategy.
Even though there's an incoming Trump administration which is hard line when it comes to Iran.
Yes, but this is the Iranian strategy. You try, you fail 9 out of 10 times, but the 10th time you find where you can maneuver. It's the right time. Your adversary is occupied somewhere else. There's election. There's some, and you play your cards and you try to move on through the little
So they're playing the long game.
They are playing the long game. They already started, and we have to understand the people in South Lebanon didn't move around with Hezbollah uniform. It's completely integrated into the population. The people that are coming back, even if they are not in uniform, you don't know who they are. They are, at the same time, they could be civilians, agricultural, merchants, whatever, and they could be operatives from Hezbollah.
Ronnie Abu Zaid, what's your reading of Iran's posture at this point? Our correspondent in Tehran Wednesday was reporting that they were putting feelers out for diplomatic talks with Western powers.
Well, that's a talk. To be honest, I can't speak to what's happening in Iran. I've been very much focused on what's happening here in Lebanon and the momentous events that we have seen here in Lebanon. So, you know, in terms of your guest's comment about Hezbollah and the inability to know if who its fighters are, that's very true. It is a clandestine organization. It is a guerrilla force. It is, according to the Lebanese cabinet manifestos, a resistance group. And like the French resistance, you can't know necessarily who its members are. That is the nature of its activities, and that is why it has been able to do what it has done since the early 1980s, when it formed and armed in response to Israel's invasion and occupation of Lebanese territory.
Yeah, and then there's the aspect again of this interregnum in Washington right now. The Wall Street Journal highlighting what it sees as a bit of a surprise, a smooth transition, where Joe Biden's outgoing national security advisor has been keeping the incoming one in the loop on all initiatives concerning the Middle East. Jake Sullivan's successor, Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, who clearly does not want a forever war in the Middle East. Instead, some kind of deal.
Hamas has been devastated. Iran is incredibly exposed at this point. So I think now is a moment to craft some type of arrangement that doesn't just put a pause for future October 7th, truly brings stability to the Middle East, sets the stage for what we saw just a few years ago with the Abraham Accords.
Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib, on the night of November 5th, when Donald Trump won the election, many thought, oh, nothing's going to happen in the Middle East between now and Inauguration Day, but it did. Your thoughts listening there to Mike Waltz?
I actually think he's on point there. I mean, Hamas has been utterly defeated. They have remnants throughout the Gaza Strip who are merely terrorizing the local population and are holding on governance by a thread. Hezbollah has been also defeated in an embarrassing manner. I mean, I can't understate this, not just in terms of the destruction of their entire first, second, and third tier leadership, but all of their heavy weaponry, all of their long-range rockets, the long vaunted rockets that could reach Dimona's, the nuclear reactor in Dimona, have been effectively eliminated. Iran's entire air defense system right now consists of Soviet relics after the Israeli airstrike that destroyed the S-300s. So we've seen that, and certainly the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, it would take merely a week or two of concentrated U.S. air power coupled with special operations and intelligence operations to set them back significantly. So I agree with Mr. Waltz that, in fact, Iran is exposed. The so-called axis of resistance has been severely weakened and set back. It doesn't make them less of a potential threat in the future. Now, what's interesting about what Mr. Waltz is saying is that a deal, I mean, we have to remember, Mr. Trump was the first to actually walk into North Korea, and he shook hands with Mr. Kim Jong-un. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Trump offers some kind of a meeting in Iran or in Iraq to meet with Iranian leadership to actually put an end or begin the 1,000-mile journey towards reconciling U.S. relationships. I think there will be a gap that concerns me between the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration in terms of the ceasefire in Lebanon. For example, when it comes to empowering the Lebanese armed forces, giving them the resources, working with the French to try to mobilize those 5,000 to 10,000 Lebanese troops and getting them salaries, getting them the support, getting them the intelligence and logistics. That concerns me greatly because in that gap, so it's more of a tactical gap that could undermine the ceasefire. But in terms of a strategic gap, I'm actually not concerned because I do think.
But you heard, I'm sorry, Ahmed, you heard the incoming National Security Advisor there reference those Abraham Accord deals that were struck under Trump, normalization of ties between Israel and Arab states. But of course, those accords ignored Palestinians. Will it be any different this time?
Precisely. I agree that part of what made the accords somewhat problematic is that they attempted to bypass the Palestinian issue, and October 7 proved that you cannot simply do that. You cannot, put your head in the sand. And I actually think the Saudis right now hold essentially all the cards when it comes to being the gateway for Israel's integration, regional integration. Something that seems hard when so many are accusing Israel of war crimes or even genocide. But I actually think that the Saudis right now are the key player in, particularly over the next 2 years when the Republicans have full control of Congress, to actually get a mutual defense treaty with the United States codified through Congress in exchange for normalizing relations with Israel. And I actually think the Saudis, unlike Hezbollah, which backtracked on its linking of a ceasefire in Lebanon with a ceasefire in Gaza, I actually think the Saudis this time are going to be serious about not delinking normalization with Israel with some kind of a pathway towards Palestinian statehood, because they cannot afford to lose their legitimacy in front of the Arab and Muslim world. I've been having a lot of conversations behind the scenes with folks connected to the Abraham House and the Abraham Accords and to the Saudis and to the religious. I mean, the Indonesians are even wanting to be in on the Abraham Accords. They want to normalize relations, and they're going to eat with Israel for all the political, economic, and geostrategic benefits that gets them. But they're going to look to the Saudis to take that first initial steps. And we're talking about the two biggest, most significant Arab and Muslim nations in the entire world. And I think Mr. Trump and his national security team will hopefully understand that and similarly apply pressure on Mr. Netanyahu, who has been intransigent, who has been kind of captive, if you will, to the far-right agenda of his far-right ministers who've prevented the deal as some kind of a movement, if you will, towards Palestinian statehood and entrenched the settler enterprise. And I also want to say something really important that I think has been largely missing from the conversation. Why is it that Netanyahu went for a ceasefire in Lebanon and he didn't go for one, or has been resistant to go for one in Gaza? Simple. And I mean, not to oversimplify things, but his coalition isn't going to fall apart because of a deal in Lebanon, unlike the threats that he received from Ben Gvir and from Smotrich if he were to stop a war in Gaza. And so I think we need to make that differentiation clear and proceed accordingly with how we anticipate the incoming Trump administration, the implementation of the ceasefire in Lebanon having an impact, and what we could see in the next couple of months as the lame duck Biden administration pushes for a final Hail Mary to try and have a legacy and say that we may have been able to, like we were actually able to stop the two most destructive wars in recent Middle Eastern history.
All right, and 14 months ago, Nomi Bar Yaakov, we thought Israel's prime minister was on borrowed time after the security failures that led to the October 7th Hamas-led attack. He's not a lame duck leader. He has a majority, which 64 seats in the 64 seats in the Knesset is a comfortable majority by Israeli standards. Again, let's put Ahmed's question to you. If you're Netanyahu and the choice is between a normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia that includes a normalization of ties with Palestinians, or propping up a far-right bolstered coalition, which does he choose?
He probably chooses the latter. because sorry about I've got a slight cold. He would choose the latter because he would like to stay in power for obvious reasons. He doesn't want to go to prison. Not only that he's got serious corruption trials hanging over him, he also is responsible for the atrocities of the 7th of October last year, and he's avoiding any kind of state commission, which will inevitably take place once he is no longer prime minister. The big question is, what kind of leverage is President-elect Donald Trump going to exercise over Netanyahu when he comes into force in order to enforce or force a ceasefire in Gaza on Netanyahu? And I think President-elect Trump is very clear that he wants no wars, and he wants the defense deal with Saudi Arabia, and that Israel will have to agree to a Palestinian state. The borders, not necessarily the precise 67 borders, but let's not forget that in the so-called deal of the century, there was a Palestinian state in question, not the kind of Palestinian state that it was on the table before. Nevertheless, I think the debate will go back, and the trajectory is going to be to try to end the wars in Gaza, secure the ceasefire in Lebanon, and I think we need to elaborate upon that because there are some issues as to how to secure it, and move towards normalization, first and foremost with Saudi Arabia and then with other countries based on the Arab Peace Initiative, which calls for a Palestinian state within the 67 borders, and that is the framework of which Saudi Arabia and other countries are working on. And I think that is what's going to happen. And I don't think it's going to be a liberal peace. I think it's going to be an illiberal, forced peace on Israel, because we know that President-elect Donald Trump is not going to hold back on exercising the leverage that we know the US has. And that's the leverage that's also led to the ceasefire in Lebanon.
Rania Abu Zaid, sitting where you are, your thoughts on an incoming Trump administration, what you just heard there from Nomi Bar Yaakov?
Well, he's certainly more hardline on Iran, but having said that, many people here don't see too much sunlight between the Biden administration and an incoming Trump administration. If anything, the Trump administration is just more honest about its objectives, and it doesn't pretend to uphold some things like international law. Let's not forget that the Biden administration has green-lighted Israel's actions in Gaza. Israel is a state that stands accused at the in the international courts of genocide, crimes against humanity, and other atrocities that we thought were relegated to the history books. So, people don't really expect too much. They just, if anything, expect a more honest administration in terms of its objectives.
Gil Mihaly, you agree?
Well,
there won't be much of a difference between the Biden and Trump administrations?
I think there's an interesting phenomenon that we didn't see since '68, when Nixon was president-elect and he was running America's foreign policy on Vietnam, while Johnson was still in power until January. So we see the same thing, and there is a kind of a planetary Trump effect. Everyone is maneuvering according to what he thinks Trump will do come January 20th, and it's already shaping the world. I think Putin is making decisions according to what he thinks Trump will do. Netanyahu certainly is waiting to his arrival to the White House, and I think that only Netanyahu and Trump can do something about the Palestinian subject, because Netanyahu broke the code in Israel. They have a grip. He has a grip on public opinion. He found the way to control public opinion, at least a part of public opinion. He has a very solid coalition. However, what is more important for him is his personal survival, and he is working in two time frames: tomorrow morning and history. What's happening in a year or 2 years doesn't care, because a year is 365 days staying in power until tomorrow. And so I think that if there will be a deal in Israel that will assure him immunity, if there will be a pressure from Trump, because he can't say, let's wait out Trump, someone else will be better. He couldn't say, he won't be able to say that. So I think that this could create, I don't know how probable it is, but it could create a situation that if you offer him the head of the mullahs, if you say that there will be an accord with the Saudis, and that his trial will be annulled.
He's supposed to be back in court in what, in 10 days' time now?
December 10th.
Yeah.
And I think he's quite worried.
Will he be, if you're a betting man, would you say he's going to be on trial?
He is on trial.
No, but will he be in court?
I think so. I don't see. Well, he tried to avoid it. He tried to postpone, but he only got a week. But the fact that he will testify means that there is something, because they could have asked for an annulment of the trial. He had 4 months to do it, and he didn't. So I think that his counselors think that there is a case.
Rani Abu Zaid mentioning earlier how there's also that case that's now that arrest warrant put out by the International Criminal Court. France, which has arguably been the West's most active advocate for helping Lebanon, also involved in helping to broker the truce that we're talking about, albeit with this statement that came out on Wednesday from the Foreign Ministry, the timing of it drawing scrutiny, the Foreign Ministry ruling out an arrest of Netanyahu should he visit Paris on the grounds that Israel's not a member of the International Criminal Court. Quote, such immunities apply to Prime Minister Netanyahu and the others and will have to be taken into account should the ICC request of us their arrest and surrender. The statement goes on to read that in accordance with the long-standing friendship between France and Israel, two democracies committed to the rule of law and to respect for a professional and independent justice system, France intends to continue to work in close cooperation with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the other Israeli authorities to achieve peace and security for all in the Middle East. Rania, I'm kind of missing something here because it had been frosty the last couple of weeks between Macron and Netanyahu, and now we get these statements. What's it all about?
Very good question, but few people here think that it was a coincidence, the timing of that statement and, you know, France being back in the good books as far as the Israelis were concerned with regard to this ceasefire negotiations that were, you know, the ceasefire that was brokered between France and the U.S. So, but, you know, this idea of the rule of law and, you know, it just exposed what many people here see as the double standards in international law and the total impunity and the lack of accountability for Israeli leaders in terms of their conduct over these past 14 months in particular.
Little thing to add to that.
Yes, that the famous resistance movement that you defend killed Rafik Hariri. The state of Lebanon.
I don't defend it. I'm a journalist.
Didn't help
I'm a journalist.
The United Nations investigation into the murder. The same resistance movement in 2008 staged a putsch. They declared they participated in the war in Syria without the permission of the government of Lebanon or the Lebanese people, and started a war against Israel last year again without the permission of the Lebanese government and the Lebanese people. This is a very strange resistance movement.
And that is an internal matter for the Lebanese people to discuss, and certainly after this war.
No.
There will be a political accounting.
One at a time. Rania Abu Zaid. One at a time. Rania Abu Zaid.
The ceasefire made it...
One at a time. Rania Abu Zaid.
I was saying that that is an internal discussion for the Lebanese, and certainly it has its very ferocious detractors here in Lebanon. There will be a political accounting for what has happened in this war. And to reiterate, when your guest said that I'm defending the resistance movement, Sir, I am a journalist who conveys the sentiments of people who are here. I report. And here in Lebanon, Hezbollah has been defined as a resistance movement by successive cabinet manifestos. That is how it is referred to here. But again, it has its domestic detractors, and it has people who are certainly itching to hold it to account for what has happened in this war.
Let me bring in Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib on this. Ahmed, again, about this, the French saying they wouldn't arrest Netanyahu if he came to Paris. At the same time, they're back at it this Thursday. Emmanuel Macron dispatching his envoy for the region, the former Foreign and Defense Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, who, there you see, on his visit to see the Lebanese Prime Minister in Beirut. Your thoughts on the statements out of Paris, to which I can add, by the way, that a foreign ministry spokesperson was asked this Thursday if Vladimir Putin would be arrested if he showed up in Paris, and the answer was no comment.
Certainly, I will address that, but I want to go back to an earlier point that my two previous colleagues had mentioned, and I don't necessarily think Ms. Rania is a defender of Hezbollah. I don't think that's a fair characterization. However, I have heard this same point nevertheless brought up with regard to Hamas and why many Palestinians or pro-Palestine folks refuse to talk about Hamas and the disaster that this resistance organization has been to the Palestinian people. And I hear this point over and over that this is an internal Palestinian matter that can be addressed through elections and that this is not relevant to the broader discussion. And I call complete BS on that. I think that's hogwash and utter nonsense. This is not an internal matter. This is something that has impacted Israelis on October 7th, the entirety of the region. And when it comes to Lebanon, this has impacted Syrians, the Turks, the Israelis, the entirety of the region. And I know the wonderful people of Lebanon who have been wanting to hold Hezbollah accountable since the 2020 peer explosion that was utterly devastating to Beirut. And where are we at right now with that? So I don't think attributing this internal issue, like keeping it in-house, is not going to cut it anymore for either Lebanon or the Palestinian people. As with regard to the French foreign minister, I think it is unfortunately predictable that there are some who are going to backtrack on holding Israel accountable. There are some who are going to kind of have what some would call a double standard, Putin versus somebody like Netanyahu. However, I am a pragmatist, and I believe that if that's what it takes to get something done, if that's what it takes to exercise leverage and pressure over Mr. Netanyahu to get an end of the war, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, to save what can be saved of the Lebanese people and the people in Palestine, then so be it, because we've really not seen anything come out of a lot of these arrest warrants, going back to Omar al-Bashir in Sudan, going back to all these different leaders. And I will say also to my Israeli friends that, you know, this accusation of a double standard toward Israel, I mean, this is the first time, like the ICC has almost exclusively, up until Mr. Putin, gone after leaders in the global south. And this was the first time that any formal warrant has been issued to Israeli officials. So I support the French role in mediating the ceasefire. I acknowledge that it reeks of a double standard. However, I'm willing to tolerate that if it means saving lives, if it means exerting pressure on Netanyahu to get him to change course.
And we will have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we've run out of time. Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Washington. Rania Abu Zaid in Beirut, Nomi Bar Yaakov in London. Gil Mihaly, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.